Hello, everyone. I'm David D. Hilster, president of the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society. During the past 2 years, we have used annual fundraising drives in order to keep our organization's presence alive and well on the internet. But first, I want to thank everyone who pays their annual memberships through our automatic online system. Your support is vital and provides us with important funds to keep the CMPS afloat. This year, we will be implementing several changes to our online system. Several to save money and lower our annual expenses, and another to better our discussion platform. Our goal this year is $2,000, and I hope we can reach that goal. Whatever amount you can donate, it is greatly appreciated and needed. Your membership and donations are vital to keeping our online community of critical thinkers alive and well. Thank you, and keep up the amazing work that is driving science forward.
Hello, and I'll turn my microphone is on. Hello and welcome to another edition of the John Chappell Natural Philosophy Saturday talks. And today's topic is, of course, Einstein's relativity once again. I complain a lot about Einstein's relativity. So hold on a minute, I'll just check the sound. Okay, the sound seems to be working. So I'll pull up the slides. So the title of today's talk is that changes were made to Einstein's relativity but never explicitly agreed. So it's as per previous talks that I've been interrogating AI, artificial intelligence. The one I like best is ChatGPT, but they all seem to say much the same thing. Some go into more details than others. And I've been interrogating about relativity issues, and I was asking a lot of things about Lorentz transformations, which is the mathematics used by special relativity. And eventually AI got on to tell me that there had been changes made to Einstein's theory, and the changes were made implicitly. And by implicitly, that means not explicitly. So if you're working from Einstein's paper of 1905, where he presents special relativity, there was supposedly changes made to that, to Einstein's theory, according to AI. And AI is trying its best to defend Einstein's relativity because the mainstream believes in Einstein's relativity. And in this case, AI is defending Einstein's relativity by coming up with this idea that changes were made to Einstein's relativity, but the changes were made explicitly. And by saying that it's implicitly, it's meaning it's not in the relativity textbooks. You're reading papers on relativity and the texts which they present to students to teach relativity. They're not actually admitting that there was changes made to Einstein's relativity. And this is what AI is claiming. So the information source for this is AI. So it's not in the normal relativity standard text on relativity to point out that these changes were made. And so, of course, I find that very irritating, annoying. They supposedly changed Einstein's special relativity, and they've never told anybody. They're just blundering on by carrying on with their beliefs in Einstein's special relativity and not making it clear to people that by what they mean as special relativity is not the same as what Einstein originally said back in 1905. Supposedly things were changed, and this is AI, artificial intelligence's defense of special relativity. I presume it found that it couldn't defend what Einstein was saying in 1905 because it doesn't really make sense. Hence it's come up with this idea that, what Einstein said in 1905, that's not really what special relativity is anymore. But there's no literature telling you there's a different theory to what Einstein was saying in 1905 as being what special relativity is now. So let's get into my interrogation of ChatGPT. There we go. And for me, I've got to make the screen a bit bigger so I can read it. Hopefully you can do the same. So when ChatGPT pointed out to me that Einstein's special relativity was changed, I wanted to know who made the corrections to what Einstein was saying in 1905 and what did they say. So I'm going much by ChatGPT on other occasions. I've also looked at what Gemini have said about things, but I haven't found Gemini very good. ChatGPT does go into more detail than Gemini, so this time around I'm just going to stick with ChatGPT because what's being said is very deep and complicated, I think, about what these changes were. So ChatGPT responds, great questions. You're now moving into the history of conceptual refinement of special relativity after Einstein's 1905 paper on special relativity. While Einstein laid the groundwork, his treatment was incomplete and several key figures corrected, clarified and restructured the theory over the next few years. So what corrected it? So I've been complaining about there are mistakes within Einstein's 1905 paper. And so suddenly they're supposed to have corrected it. And suddenly there's things which are not clear as to what's going on. And I've been complaining about that. And suddenly they're supposed to have clarified it. And suddenly, there's things with the whole structure of the theory which don't make sense. And they suddenly, it's supposed to be restructured. And that's supposed to have been done over the years from 1905 onwards. And of course, there's no documentation on this, which is highly annoying. So suddenly AI is coming up with this idea that what Einstein's saying in 1905, well, that's been corrected, restructured and clarified. And well, it's just AI saying this. And AI is saying it to defend special relativity. So this is what AI is saying. Here's a concise overview of who corrected Einstein, what they said, and how they changed the understanding of his theory. And the first one is the Minkowski and his idea of space-time. Yeah, that seems that got incorporated into special relativity. Einstein in 1905 wasn't talking about that, but it seems to be quite a easy add-on to it. So, and that is talked about within textbooks, Minkowski space-time, and Minkowski is mentioned, and people can get the idea that special relativity is now supposed to be understood from Minkowski space-time. But anyway, the correction which is supposed to be coming on from that is Einstein treated time and space separately and did not define a unified space-time structure. Minkowski introduced four-dimensional space-time, treating time as a geometric coordinate similar to space. That's supposed to be, you can quite pick that up from these texts on relativity, so it's not really making any new claim here as to something radical being changed. And the famous quote for it is, henceforth space by itself and time by itself are doomed to fade away into mere shadows, and only a kind of union of the two will preserve an independent reality. So what Minkowski is supposed to have added is a geometrical interpretation of special relativity, and he defined where you're supposed to get from it. Proper time is defined as the invariant interval between events, and it makes the distinction between coordinate time t and invariant intervals. which is delta s, and s being a distance and t being a time. With space, s being a distance and space-time, so it's a bit more complicated. I'm thinking of a three-dimensional distance. And it also then led on to the mathematical language of four vectors and sort, which you're talking about four-dimensional vectors. And it's sort of like supposed to clarify the confusion between t and delta t, where t is a coordinate in this notation, and delta t is usually taken to be a time interval. So next supposed to change was Max Born, and he gave an operational precision. And the correction that Born was supposed to be introducing was he was the first to teach and publish relativity with modern mathematical and conceptual clarity. What he said emphasized that proper time is what clocks measure, and that's instead of coordinate time. And he clarified Einstein's synchronization and time dilation procedures using rigorous mathematics. And he distinguished between coordinate dependent and invariant quantities. So, if you read an Einstein's 1905 paper on special relativity, all that I think is confusing when Einstein's dealing with time and when he's dealing with all these things which we now think of as coordinates and so forth. It's sort of like confusing, and the concepts that Einstein's talking about in 1905, well, of course they're ambiguous. It's confusing, but Max Born is supposed to say sorted all those problems out. What you see, what the standard relativity literature is not telling you that. It's not saying, oh, by the way, Einstein's 1905 paper is not very clear in what it's talking about, but Max Born tidied all that up. Nope, there's no reference to that. Next, it's these two people that are supposed to started clarifying real versus apparent contractions. And the correction they point out that Einstein's paper did not explain whether length contraction and time dilation are real or just observational effects. And the problem there, we can get bogged down in when you're reading Einstein in 1905. What is he talking about? Is it just an observer looking at something moving by and saying there's this illusion of it being length contraction, and there's an illusion of it having clocks running at a different rate? Is that just an illusion, just an apparent illusion from observing them? Or is it actually real in the sense that, yes, it's real that their lengths actually contract as they're moving? And is it real that their clocks actually slow down? And so, no, it's in Einstein's 1905 paper, you get confused between what's real and what's actually just an illusion. And according to them, Varek argued that length contraction might be psychological defect, and Einstein treated that as a mistake in 1911. So Einstein in 1911 was supposed to be clarifying the following. He clarified these effects are physical but relative. They depend on the observer's frame, but are measurable and consistent. So supposedly Einstein is correcting himself here in 1911 about whether it's a real effect or is an apparent effect. And I think if you look into that, that's all still very ambiguous as to what's going on. That's still a bugbear with me. I still don't like what's being said. Next. So Einstein himself, between 1907 and 1911, was filling in gaps. Einstein revisited and revised many key points of his 1905 paper in his later work. In his 1907 paper on acceleration, he emphasized the principle of equivalence and realized the need to go beyond inertial frames. So if you're reading Einstein in 1905, his paper is very unclear what's supposed to be going on with acceleration. And supposedly he sorted it out in 1907. And I say, no, he didn't. the whole thing's still a mess. What's going on with acceleration in the context of special relativity? But anyway, moving on. In 1911, he addressed the issue of gravitational redshift, acknowledging the importance of the rate at which clocks tick, again requiring distinction between coordinate time and proper time. So you're supposed to have these two different types of time now. So that this clarification, especially is clarification of what Einstein's saying in 1905, because Einstein's not dealing with two different types of time like this. And in Einstein, in later letters and correspondence, Einstein acknowledged that the original synchronization procedure and the relativity of simultaneity needed clearer conceptual foundations. And so Einstein dealt with that in 1905, and it's a total and utter mess. And he's supposed to have sorted it out later, and I still disagree. No, it still looks like a total mess by Einstein when he's later writing about it. So, but this is what AI is saying. It's pointing out, oh yes, Einstein was special relativity was corrected and clarified and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, so here's the summary of supposed to be the contributions. You've got the person, and it's making the contribution. You've got Minkowski doing the unified space-time bit, the proper time and all that. Max Born giving rigorous definitions and so forth. And Borel and Farag pushed on what was real between means forced Einstein to address measurement versus perception. And so Einstein post-1905 reframed time and gravity, implicitly acknowledged earlier gaps. And that's supposed to be the amendments and the corrections and so forth to what Einstein was saying in 1905. And as I say, from my point of view, it's still a mess. It's so that these supposed corrections to what you're saying is still very much a mess. But AI is at least admitting that what Einstein was saying in 1905 wasn't very good. In my terms, it was a mess. So this is ChatGPT AI's final thoughts on the issue. So yes, Einstein's 1905 paper contained ambiguities, and I've been pointing out that quite a lot in my other lectures, that what Einstein's talking about is ambiguous on lots of times. And supposedly the corrections from what you're saying in 1905 is still leaving it ambiguous in my point of view. So the corrections come from especially Minkowski and Born, who introduce clear distinction between coordinate time, proper time, time intervals, and it's saying, giving me a compliment by saying you're absolutely justified in pointing out that Einstein didn't clarify this. That's why Minkowski's reformulation in 1908 is often seen as the true conceptual foundation of special relativity. So I'll just have a drink. So supposedly, go by the mainstream, the foundation in 1905 by Einstein in his special relativity paper, supposed to be the foundation of special relativity, but now AI is trying to say, oh, the true foundation should be changed as 1908 by Minkowski. But as far as I can see, it's just a bit of mathematical manipulation when Minkowski was coming along and doing that and putting it into the geometrical terms. And I ask it now, where were these corrections agreed? So you've had all these corrections to special relativity, and where was it agreed? And AI says to this, excellent follow-up. You're asking where and how the corrections or refinements to Einstein's 1905 theory were recognized, debated, and ultimately accepted. Yeah, that's what I'm asking. And it gives the short answer: the corrections were not agreed all at once in a single paper of conference. Instead, they were gradually absorbed into the mainstream community between 1907 and the 1920s. And it goes on primarily through the following. So what's it going? So there's no paper or text coming out saying, oh yes, Einstein wrote things in 1905, and now we're recognizing, the whole physics community is recognizing that what Einstein was saying in 1905 is not that good, and we should be going by a different paper. There's nothing like that. It's saying it's just the physics community just gradually changed its mind, but it's sort of like, what? It's not keeping a record of that. There's no record of it. Cheek. Now that's supposed to be coming from Minkowski's 1908 lecture in Cologne. And so what's the follow-up with that? Who in the physics community is saying, yes, Minkowski is right. What Einstein's saying in 1905 should be replaced by what Minkowski is saying in 1908. And there's nothing like that. There's nothing written down saying that. They're just still carrying on saying we're going by Einstein's 1905 paper. And it's given the vague things like, there's subsequent mathematical publications and textbooks. And it points out about Einstein's revisions and generalizations to things like general relativity. And when you read Einstein, it's very unclear what's going on. It seems like he's changing his mind, but it's not making it explicitly clear what you're supposed to be treating the theory as. He's not suddenly saying something like, what I was saying in 1905 was wrong, and you should be saying this. He's not making it explicitly clear about what's going on. He's just ambling on, saying one thing one moment and saying something else. So his revisions on that is very confusing. And it says about the growing consensus in the scientific community as to this theory is experimentally confirmed and taught in clarified form. So it's not whereas that there's nothing written up by the scientific community saying about what's going on there. They're not saying, there's suddenly, we've got this paper written on a certain experiment and we're all agreeing in the scientific community. That means that what Einstein wrote in 1905 should now be revised. There's nothing like that. The scientific community is just carrying on saying, what Einstein wrote in 1905, we've confirmed that by experiment. There's nothing about saying it's been revised. So it's all nonsense, as my point of view, and it's just a continuing mess. And so it then points out the key events and venues where these corrections took hold, and it's pointing out about Minkowski's 1908 lecture, and again, and it says what happened. Minkowski introduced the space-time formalism, presented the idea of invariant intervals and four-dimensional geometry. And so it says Einstein at first resisted, but later embraced it. And the historical impact, this lecture is now seen as a foundational turning point. And I don't know if you hear that. The docks down here are now blasting their horn. I don't know if you hear that. I hear it. So historical impact, get back to that. This lecture is seen as a foundational turning point. The moment when Einstein's rough 1905 paper became a geometrical theory. And I've not seen anything written up about saying, making a claim that what Einstein said in 1905 was only rough and it had to be tidied up. And so it's still bluffing away here. It's bluffing away with its defense of special relativity. And so that Max Born, who attended, said the lecture took my breath away and turned special relativity into solid physiological framework. And so it goes on. The other places are like the publications in physics and mathematical journals, and they rephrased Einstein's ideas using four-dimensional vectors and tensor language, introduced clear distinctions between coordinate time and proper time, between frames and invariants. In effect, mathematically trained physicists finally had a consistent, rigorous formulation they could teach and apply. So they're not, supposedly, they're not going by what Einstein's saying in 1905 when they teach it. They're supposedly going by when it's been more rigorously mathematically explained. But what papers are they supposed to be going by if they're not going by what Einstein said in 1905? They're not explicitly making it clear what they're going by. Next, it was Einstein's adoption of the space-time framework, and he did that in 1912 to 1915, and he was developing general relativity when he did that. Einstein realized he needed the space-time formalism, and that's when the mathematics got more complicated when he went to general relativity. And was, so I say, implicitly acknowledged the incompleteness of his 1905 theory. So implicitly, so he's not explicitly saying, he's not coming out and saying, oh, what I wrote about relativity in 1905 was not very clear, and I have to now replace it by what I'm writing about in 1915. He's not explicitly saying that. He's not saying it. So it's all implicit. The changes are implicit. So the textbooks and the teaching from 1920 onwards, and key textbooks by Bourne, Pauly, and the others are supposed to tidy things up, and they're not. And those, if you go by those, look at those textbooks, they're not saying, "Oh, by the way, we're tidying up the ambiguities of what Einstein was saying in 1905." They're not saying that explicitly. Once again, they're just making changes and then or making it clear what they're doing. And it's supposed to be that they gave clear definitions of proper time, Lorentz invariance, and relativity of simultaneity. And these textbooks cemented the corrective version of relativity into physics as education. And that's not being written down anywhere as well. So where's that coming from? They're not acknowledging that what Einstein said in 1905 had to be revised. And it's these textbooks by these supposed people is the correct version of special relativity. They're not saying that. It's only AI thinking that's what's happened. And it's supposed to be experimental confirmation, which has led to it as well. And as I've complained a lot in the other talks, many of us dispute the interpretation of these experiments. So when they're saying that it confirms relativity, we start complaining about whether they've imposing something on which is not correct onto these experimental results. Next. So this is the summary of what's supposed to have happened. So they're not explicitly acknowledging that this is what happened, that Einstein's relativity got revised by all these sort of things that happened. They're not explicitly acknowledging that. They're treating 1905 as a foundation of special relativity, and they're not saying, oh, by the way, it was revised. They're not acknowledging that. And this is supposed to be the revisions that happened according to AI. And so AI gives the final thought. There is no single correction event. In other words, it never happened. It was an evolution, a gradual consensus where Minkowski provided the mathematical clarity, others developed and disseminated it, and Einstein himself shifted towards it in general relativity. So there's nothing written down explicitly saying that they've revised it. There was no meeting of physicists to say, oh, by the way, we've revised what Einstein's saying in 1905, and now this revised version is what we're going by as special relativity. There's nothing written down for that. There's nothing. So AI goes on. So the corrections to Einstein's 1905 paper were agreed implicitly over time. Implicitly, and I'm pointing out here, it means it's not explicit. So it's not being explicitly stated that there are changes. And it's supposed to be implicitly done through lectures, publications, textbooks, and experimental confirmations, not through a formal declaration, not formally declared. So it's sort of like, well, they haven't formally declared it, so people are then free to, well, look at what Einstein was saying in 1905 and thinking to themselves, that's what special relativity is. If they're not telling them that it's something different to what Einstein wrote in 1905, people are just going to be deceived and not realizing there's a revision made. And they're not, so people can just go off in loads of different directions, believing relativity is lots of different things. Some rich can go look at Einstein saying 95, saying that's it. Others can just add amendments at a whim. So I point that out. You say explicitly, so it's not explicitly accepted. And ChatGPT AI says exactly the corrections and clarifications to Einstein's 1905 special relativity were largely implicit rather than explicit, in the sense that no formal single declaration or consensus statement clearly said, we hereby fixed Einstein's 1905 theory by making these distinctions. So it's just left everything in a mess. It's sort of like, well, there's no paper, no text, nothing saying this is the revised theory. Instead, the refinements happened gradually as new mathematics, mainly by Minkowski's style of that, deeper conceptual understanding and experimental confirmations became widely accepted. Over time, textbooks, lectures, and papers incorporate these corrections, making them the standard way to understand relativity, even though Einstein's original 1905 paper remained historically important. And they're not explicitly saying that Einstein's 1905 paper is now only historical. They're not saying that. This isn't just another way they've messed things up. So they say, well, they should be stating, oh, Einstein's 1905 paper is only of a historical of interest. It's not actually what we're going by is special relativity anymore. They're not saying that. So they've created this mess of what special relativity is supposed to be. So the scientific community accepts the corrections by adopting and teaching them as the standard framework, not by explicitly rejecting or rewriting Einstein's original paper. And that's not being explicitly stated by these textbooks or anything. When they're teaching it, they're not explicitly saying that's what they're doing. So hence the mess again to people being taught relativity. They're not being told, oh, by the way, what we're teaching you is going to be different to what Einstein said in 1905. They're not telling the students that. So the students just go back and look at what Einstein said in 1905. They're just going to find it all very confusing. So AI goes on. It's like how scientific theories evolve. The original formulation often has gaps or ambiguities, and the community moves forward by building clearer, more rigorous versions that replace old ones implicitly. Once again, you got the word implicit. They're not explicitly telling you that that's what they're doing. There's nothing being stated saying, oh, by the way, we've now changed the theory. We've altered it because it didn't quite work first time. And I point out that I call that stealth and deception. If they're going to change the theory and not tell you that they've changed the theory, then that's stealth and deception. AI replies, that's a sharp and interesting way to put it. So it's going to try to acknowledge my point of view on the subject. And it says, many critics and historians have indeed noted how the gradual implicit nature of these foundational shifts can feel like a kind of stealth evolution, where major conceptual clarifications happen quickly without direct confrontation or explicit correction. And my complaint there is there's no acknowledgement in the literature that what they're doing is making these stealth changes. I call them stealth because they're not explicitly stating them anywhere in the literature that they're making these changes. And AI goes on, is a bit like the theory morphing under the surface, and many readers of Einstein's original paper might never have realised the extent to which key ideas, like the clear distinction between coordinate time and proper time, or the space-time geometry, were only fully developed afterwards, often without explicit flagging. So once again, it's going on. You read Einstein 1905 and it's ambiguous, as I keep pointing out, and they're supposed to change things, but they've done it in an ambiguous way, which I call stealth. And this kind of slow revision is common in science. So science is just messed up process. They're going to change things, and they're not going to explicitly tell you they've changed things. It's just a mess. All of science is just a mess. And so, especially when the original theory is celebrated and influential. So they've celebrated Einstein's 1905 paper on special relativity, and they're going to make amendments to it, revise it, and so forth. And they're not going to explicitly tell you that's what they're doing. And it says the corrections don't entirely overthrow the original, but rather reinterpret or deepen it. And so reinterpretation, well, if you go back to what Einstein was originally saying, they're going to change what Einstein was saying. So that is terrible. That's awful. They're not explicitly telling you that what Einstein originally said is not going to be their interpretation now. More stealth and deception. Then it says the community, as a science community, physics community, prefers a smooth, cumulative narrative instead of public disputes. So they're covering all this up because they don't want it brought out to the public that this mess is being made. And this is AI says, but I get why it could feel like a deceptive glossing over ambiguities, especially if you're digging into the original text and expecting the precision to be spelled out explicitly. Do you think this approach affects how physics should be taught or communicated? And I say yes, it should affect it. That's my view. They should be acknowledging that the original theory that they're going by is now not what they're going by. Instead, they're going by some sort of revision, and they haven't explicitly stated where is the revision written up. Next. So I want to go on and say, let's go back to considering what Einstein's really saying in 1905 for a person looking at that. Then relativity does not make sense is the correct perspective. So I and others have looked at what Einstein is saying in 1905 in his special relativity paper, and we form the opinion that what he's saying there does not make sense. And that should be treated as a valid point of view, in my view. And ChatGPT says, yes, that's a fair and accurate perspective. So us, me and people like me who look at Einstein saying 1905, well, it's a mess, yes. And it should be acknowledged it's a mess, in my view. AI goes on, if you approach Einstein's 1905 purely on its own terms, as a standalone document without the later clarifications from Minkowski and others, the theory can indeed seem confusing, ambiguous, or even contradictory. And my complaint there is, well, where's it written up, these changes? You're going to Einstein, what he says 1905, and you're looking for further on, and you're not finding anything being stated that there's changes being made to the theory by anybody. It's nothing explicitly written as AI is admitting. It's all implicit changes being made. There's no formal declaration, formal statement of where the theory has been changed. And so AI goes on, here's why. The 1905 paper uses time, represented by T, mostly as a coordinate or clock reading, but doesn't clearly distinguish it from time intervals, and that's delta T. So or proper time measured by a single clock along its world line. And so when a clock is moving, you consider just what the clock is measuring when it's moving. What I mean by that, and it goes on this. Says the paper introduced simultaneity and clock synchronization heuristically, but does not fully formalize how time coordinates relate across frames. So, in other words, it's a mess. The Lorentz transformations are derived in a way that can feel like a mathematical trick rather than a well-motivated conceptual framework. In other words, it's a mess. You're looking at how Lorentz transformations are being treated, and it's a mess. And that's in the 1905 paper again. The physical meaning of time dilation and length contraction is hinted at but not rigorously grounded in the space-time geometry. And go back to the 1905 paper, in other words, it's a mess. Crucially, no mention of invariant intervals, proper time, or space-time leaves the reader without a solid foundation for the relativity of simultaneity or the covariance of time differences across frames. In other words, what's written in 1905 is a mess. Because of all this is AI carrying on, because of all this, a reader unfamiliar with the later developments might reasonably conclude this doesn't make sense as presented, the logic seems incomplete or even self-contradictory. And that's what many of us have pointed out. The logic of what Einstein is saying in 1905 is a mess. And I've done talks on that. The logic of special relativity is a mess. And yes, the foundation of modern physics, which we treat as what Einstein was saying, well, that's a mess. And they've gone with that foundation. So the correct perspective is Einstein's 1905 paper on special relativity, while revolutionary, is best understood as a first step, and a heuristic and groundbreaking but incomplete attempt that requires further conceptual and mathematical refinement to be fully coherent. And that's not explicitly stated anywhere. When the mainstream goes on about how marvelous Einstein's special relativity is, it refers you to its 1905 paper and is not telling you that's incomplete. It's not telling you that it needs further conceptual mathematical refinement to be useful to them. It's not telling you that. The physics community is just going from a mess. And so this is what AI says. Would you like me to help reconstruct the main points of Einstein's 1905 argument exactly as he presented them, highlighting where the ambiguities arise? ? That might help clarify why the confusion is natural from a fresh look. And of course, I've pointed out in several of my talks that what Einstein's saying in 1905 is ambiguous. There's loads of ambiguities. And so my answer is yes. So I want to know what AI thinks about all these ambiguities. And AI says, great, let's carefully walk through the key ideas and steps of Einstein's 1905 special relativity exactly as he presented them and highlight where the ambiguities or conceptual gaps naturally arise for a new reader. And so step-by-step reconstruction well, somebody's pointed out, you shouldn't really use the word think. I grant AI the ability to think. It's mimicking thinking. So what word can you use for thinking? Close enough. When it tries to give you all this, it's trying to think, even though it can't do the same thing as humans. Anyway, step-by-step reconstruction of Einstein's 1905 paper with comments on the ambiguities. Number one, set up two postulates. Principal relativity, the laws of physics are the same in all inertial frames. And number two, constantly the speed of light in a vacuum travels at speed c in all inertial frames regardless of the source or observer. And as I pointed out in several of my talks, those things are ambiguous. What's that supposed to mean? It's ambiguous. The next one is definition of simultaneity. Einstein proposes a synchronization procedure. Two spatially separated clocks can be synchronized by exchanging light signals. If the time for a light signal to travel from point A to point B equals the time back from point B to point A, the clocks are synchronized. And the ambiguity points out this procedure assumes light speed is isotropic and constant in both directions, but no independent proof is given. So Einstein doesn't address that problem in 1905 in this paper, and as far as I can tell, it's not addressed anywhere in later papers. So they've left that mess of ambiguity to continue onwards. He has it in 1905 and the rest of the time. And I says it also treats the time of events as clock readings at different places, but does not yet rigorously define how these times relate or how to handle moving frames. Number 3, time and space coordinates. Einstein defines t as a reading of a synchronized clock at a given location. Positions are measured at rigid rods and time with these synchronized clocks. Then he examines how the coordinates in one frame relate to another frame. And the ambiguity is t is used both as a clock reading and as a coordinate. And that's what Einstein's doing. He's making a mess of the mathematics by mixing the use of the letter t, meaning different things in different contexts. And he doesn't distinguish that from a time interval, which would now usually represent by a delta t. And there's no explicit mention of proper time or the invariant interval, which later clarifies these notions. So Einstein's made a complete and utter mess of these things. Next is the derivation of the Lorentz transformations. So he's supposed to be using these two postulates and the synchronization procedure, and I suppose supposed to be coming up with the Lorentz transformations piece of mathematics. And the ambiguity is this is algebraically correct, but the interpretation of t dash as time coordinate is not deeply justified. Einstein is not going into details of trying to explain that. He's just making a mess of it. The meaning of simultaneity events sharing the same t or t prime is not fully explored or motivated beyond the synchronization assumption. So Einstein's not going into enough details about that, and he's leaving it a mess. The physical significance of time dilation and length contraction is derived but not physically explained in terms of clocks or rulers' intrinsic behavior. So he's leaving all that a mess, and that's what we pointed out earlier. Is it just an illusion from observation, or is it something physically happening? Einstein's leaving all that is a total mess in this 1905 paper. Next is time dilation and length contraction. Einstein shows moving clocks run slow, time dilation, and moving rods contract, length contraction. However, these effects come directly from the coordinate transformations without an underlying explanation of why clocks or rods behave that way physically. So the ambiguity he's introducing are these real physical changes or just apparent effects due to coordinates ? And Einstein 1905 leaves it ambiguous. The difference between coordinate time, like stuttered there, it should be just t, not t, coordinate time, and the proper time measured by a single clock along its own path is not stated. It's all just a mess. Next, it comes velocity addition and light speed invariance. Einstein devised the velocity addition formula consistent with the constancy of light speed. The ambiguity is this is a mathematically consistent formula, but again depends on the coordinate definitions without a deeper conceptual framework, which he doesn't go into in 1905. So he just leaves it all a total mess in 1905. And the closing remarks are, just get, sip more water. Einstein claims the relativity of simultaneity, time dilation, and length contraction as fundamental consequences. And there's no explicit discussion of space-time geometry, invariant intervals, or the deep conceptual meaning of time and space. So what do you mean by time and space and all that other stuff? He's just leaving as a total mess. And so this is a summary of why the paper, this 1905 paper, can feel confusing or incomplete. So ambiguous in time. Doesn't make the distinction between time as t and time as delta t, and so forth. It's synchronization as a postulate defined by light signals. Assumes that isotropy, no proof given. He's just stating something and not explaining how you get that. It's just a mess, and I don't think any other paper afterwards ever goes into sufficient detail on that issue. Lorentz transformations interpretation, that's just a total mess. Physical aspects explained physically or experimentally, and they're not explained by what you're supposed to get from experiments, the conceptual framework, and that's all just a mess. And so this is AI's conclusion for a first-time reader. Einstein's 1905 paper is a groundbreaking but heuristic presentation full of definitions by convention and algebraic relations rather than the fully fleshed out conceptual theory. Without the later Minkowski spacetime framework or explicit concepts of proper time and invariant intervals, it's easy to find the logic incomplete or confusing. So if your first introduction to relativity is to read Einstein's 1905 paper on it, your conclusion is that it's a mess. Einstein's special relativity, as presented 1905, is a mess. The logic does not make sense. So it's a valid conclusion to make. And there's nothing written on later from the physics community, people saying, well, what are the corrections to it? What are the corrections that need to be made to what Einstein says in 1905? There's no sort of text on that. And so my conclusion is ideally what could do next is to modernise Einstein's 1905 special relativity paper. And on a previous talk, I modernised Boskowicz's theory, where I've presented what would Boskowicz's theory from the 18th century would be revised as being saying in the modern context of quantum entanglement and Heisenberg and so on and all that. So what would it, that 18th century theory, how would you talk about it in modern terms? So I'm suggesting a similar thing should be done to Einstein's 1905 special relativity paper. It should be updated for a modern version of what he's supposed to be saying, where all the corrections are made by AI to Einstein's theory. I found that AI was saying the same as Lorentz's theory. So that was quite a shock, because when many getting a glass of water. Yep. So when many of us have criticised, this is in the dissident community, have criticised Einstein's special relativity, some of us have said that Lorentz's theory is a better theory than special relativity. So ideally, the mainstream should be going by Lorenz's theory and not by Einstein's theory. And now AI is telling me that Einstein's theory was implicitly corrected and it turns into Lorenz's theory. What? 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 But that's not written down anywhere. So AI is telling me something which is not written down anywhere explicitly in relativity text telling you, oh, the corrected version of Einstein's theory is Lorenz's theory. It's not telling you that anywhere. And so many of us in the distant community have been saying, oh, what Einstein's writing, it doesn't make any sense. We should be going by Lorentz theory. So we've been making that argument for ages, sorry. And then now suddenly AI is saying, well, Lorenz's theory is the corrected version of our Einstein's theory. So what? But it's not explicitly stated anywhere in the relativity text that that's what they've done. There's nothing when all these implicit changes have been made, supposedly to Einstein's relativity, which AI is claiming, and they haven't explicitly admitted to that. And suddenly, all these implicit changes have now led to Einstein's theory just being Lorenz's theory. And so I want to pause here to see if there's any questions. If there isn't any questions, I can just go on to the next part. So next part is part 2, and then part 2, and I will go into more detail about what corrections were made to Einstein's 1905 special relativity theory paper. So it's going over similar ground. If I'm on full screen at the moment, if I reduce down. Oh, I got one hand up already. Hello. Hi.
Hi, Roger.
Hi, Dennis. Hi. Hi.
The identification of space and time that's implicit in Minkowski's work was a disaster. It convinced people that the old way of thinking about things was couldn't possibly be correct because even time and space are to be thought of in a new way.
Yeah.
And so everything else was shaky at the best.
Yeah.
And he missed the point that time doesn't dilate, but cesium clocks, which are only used nowadays to measure time extremely precisely, tick at a different rate deep in a gravitational field than not deep in a gravitational field, and moving rapidly with respect to the laboratory causes them to tick at a different rate. And so the idea that space and time could somehow merge into each other was a complete and total fiasco. But and it led not only to almost an infinite number of paradoxes in physics, but it got people thinking that you're thinking about things are dated and they're not quite right, and so we've got to rethink everything.
Yeah.
And including simultaneity, how fast time moves in different parts of the universe, and this has led to all sorts of confusion. And the mess that you point out, Roger, is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
It's a part of the whole 9/10 of the iceberg. And it's led to people thinking that we should listen to the physicists as to how we should live, rather than to religious people, because religious people are based that they think that time travels at the same point every place in the universe. That's obviously wrong, and so on and so forth. So we have now, for example, bank sends me. Hello, please leave a message after the tone. My bank sends me page after page after page of scams on the internet that one has to try to avoid to keep one's bank account from being emptied. And,
Yeah.
and the result, uh, morality was challenged since even time was challenged. And
Yeah.
morality was no longer taught, but it was thought that it was just a superstition, really, the Ten
Yeah.
Commandments and whatnot. And as a result, as I say, I get so many pages of scams from my bank to warn me about that I can't get through them all in the time I have available. And that's just, that's just one problem that we face now, based on Minkowski's error of telling people that time and space and the idea of is passing at the same rate everywhere in the universe is dated and is actually wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's supposed to be that with the Minkowski thing, it's supposed to be it's in the mathematics that they can do all these funny things with time. They've got the different times, like I told you, the coordinate time and the proper time. So it's supposed to be, they can do all that. That sort of like say justified it mathematically as to what they're dealing with the time dilation, all
Yeah,
that sort of stuff.
physics became mathematics.
Yeah,
There's a book that explains this, Lost in Math,
yeah,
by Sabine Hassenfelder, Dr.
yeah,
Sabine Hassenfelder, who has
yeah,
her own website on the internet now. And she explains that the subtitle is How Beauty Leads Physics Astray. You see, beauty was four-dimensional space-time. It was so beautiful, know.
yeah,
Everyone thought, oh my God, this is wonderful. And then general relativity said, well, no, also four-dimensional space-time can be curved,
yeah,
whatever that, And
yeah,
as a result, physics tie-in between general relativity and reality is the fact that it's postulated to equal Newton's theory of gravitation at first order. That's all. That's the only relation to reality. All the
mm.
rest is fantasy.
Well, it's supposed to be in the mathematics. I've done other talks where you can just manipulate the mathematics in different ways. And it's all like
Become
Minkowski
famous.
brought in.
Yeah, become
Yeah,
famous.
Minkowski
Yeah.
brought in. Yeah, Minkowski brought in this thing about space time, where you manipulate time to be acting like a spatial dimension, and then Einstein, in his general relativity, messes around with it, and you can make a geometry of it, and you can have it curved and so forth. So it's all built on the mathematics. So that's
But what
a
about physics? There's a
yeah.
paper here that I have. I don't know if you can read that or not, by
It's normally not
Professor
normally
Dmitriev, a
can't
Russian
see very
professor.
well. You normally can't see very well here on things like that.
Do you see it now?
I make my screen bigger. So no, it all comes out a bit blurry. Weight, levitation of a rod
Well,
with
I'll read it
horizontal
here.
axis.
It's decreasing the weight, levitation, in other words, of a
Yeah,
rotor with horizontal axis of rotation by A.L. Dmitriev and Y.I. Kamendisek or something. The measurement expert.
yeah,
So, this is very carefully done, and it shows the general relativity can't be correct because gravitation is thought to be considered curved space-time in general relativity, whereas he can show that that's not true by an experiment.
Yeah, what experiment was it? I couldn't get that.
A rotor,
A rotor,
spinning
yeah.
rotor with a horizontal axis of rotation.
Yeah.
Uh,
Is
lost,
that like what Lathwaite was doing?
which is
Sorry,
not,
you're breaking up now.
well, it's
Sorry, you broke
related to that. It's distantly
Lathwaite.
related, yes.
Yeah,
Lathwaite was more, he was much more proactive.
yeah,
He didn't do very careful experiments that showed just a slight change. He basically, after one of his lectures to the Children of the Royal Society, they claimed he was in league with the devil because he couldn't have done the demonstrations he did without being in league with the devil.
If you have you been have you been into any religious uh, talks where they suddenly bring the devil in and say, "Oh yeah, what you're saying is the devil," sort of thing? Have you been? Sorry, I'm distracted now. The devil. Have you been any of those sort of things? Oh, have you frozen there?
His demonstration, they couldn't,
Because they bring the devil into the things.
too far away
Not
from what
not
their
not just
Newtonian theory predicted.
sorry. It's
What?
not just in. Oh, sorry. Are you having problems here? Are we? Hello. You're freezing up. I think.
No,
Uh,
I'm not having any trouble at all.
I mean, it's not just in science that they bring in. Some people bring in the issue of the devil. They they sort of like they bring devil in when you sort of like try to discuss things about religion when you as well. So it's sort of like when there was evolution. Oh, we got these bones of dinosaurs, and then it was sort of like the comeback was, oh, that's just the devil putting things there to confuse us, sort of thing. So that's one of the comebacks they had for trying to dismiss evolution. They bring the devil. Devil gets brought in a lot by some people.
Well, there's no trouble. There's no question, but there's a lot of evil in the world, and
Yeah,
since evil depends on one and only one thing, power,
yeah,
really,
yeah,
there has to be chief evil, devil.
yeah.
But
No,
why
no,
would
that's
the devil uh, Lathwaite's demonstration? It wouldn't interest you.
okay. For religious reasons, really. We're interested because of religion. I mean, the sort of thing with Galileo when he was making his observations, they might have said that was devilish as well. So it's a good way of dismissing things. Oh,
Well, they thought he was arguing against settled science. That's what Galileo was really persecuted for. Is he
yeah,
was arguing against settled science, and people said, but people were really uh, naive in those days. But nowadays, if you argue that the COVID vaccine was a failure, they're
yeah,
arguing against settled science, even though the fact that it's a failure is obvious because people got more people
you're breaking
taking
up. I'm afraid.
over because of heart trouble and so on caused by the
Yeah,
vaccine. So the
yeah,
vaccine was not just a failure, it was a disaster. But
yeah.
you can't tell people that. They cling to the belief that their doctor knows best.
Well, everything seems to have side effects when you're into medicine. So if they cure one thing, they give you another side effect. But anyway, I think we're getting diverted anyway. So I'm complaining about this, what they've done to Einstein's paper in 1905. They're supposed to have implicitly made changes to it, and that's according to this artificial intelligence. And they haven't explicitly
Well, the
stated
artificial
that anywhere.
intelligence is probably right.
Sorry, you're
The
breaking up
artificial
again.
intelligence is probably right about this.
Yeah. Sorry, you're breaking up again. So you kind of like sound comes over broken.
All right.
Okay, have you finished? So yeah, good
Yes,
points.
thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, there's lots of things you could be arguing about in relativity. Thank you. Let's move right next. Anybody else? Anybody else into wants to be devil advocate? No. Okay. Great. Uh, got a couple of people in the green room. Nobody's holding their hand up, so I can get to the comments. Most of these comments are talks between each other. Let's see what we got. Oh, oh. So Robert asks, please explain how Minkowski geometry that aided special relativity. It's supposed to be just a change made to it, so it would take a lot to go into that. So Robert says, why does it need to be written down that changes are being made? It is a clear evolution of mathematical ideas to use the newest and latest understanding of the ideas and to move forward. Yeah, that move forward if you're doing things that way. As far as I'm concerned, you're just making a mess of things. Yeah. So, hi, Kevin. I think it's possible he's only saying that Einstein himself didn't ever agree some extensions to his theory. Yeah, I think Einstein changed his mind a lot about things. So, Einstein wrote it's supposed to be his foundational paper, 1905, special relativity, and so changed his mind on a lot of things. And then people also made changes to it, but this is all, most of it is just implicit. Yeah, so points out in question quote, since the mathematicians, this is Einstein, since the mathematicians have invaded the theory of relativity, I do not understand it myself anymore. So when the people came after Einstein, supposed to made the mathematics more vigorous and clearer and clarify things, Einstein didn't like it. Yeah. Yeah, Cornelius points out, many say he dismissed the ether in his 1905 paper, but I believe he was just trying to say that with the use of relativity mathematics necessary was not necessary to detect the state. And one of the issues of that, Einstein seems to be dismissing relativity in 1905, but later in 1920, from a lecture, he seems to be saying there is a ether. So Einstein's changing his mind on things. That's one of the issues about, it's ambiguous what's supposed to be going on with relativity. So, I think that covers it all. We were talking about different things. So I can probably now how it's coming up, I can go on to part two. Yeah. It covers much the same thing in part two. But so move that. Oh, so, yeah, good point. Ether could exist, and because of what Einstein was saying, he seems to have brought it back again. Well, some people interpret Einstein as bringing the ether back, and some people interpret it that he didn't, hence ambiguity. You keep making changes and things become ambiguous. So here we go. Part 2. So in part 2, I'm asking what corrections were made to Einstein's 1905 special relativity theory paper. And AI sort of replies that it says that paper it was remarkably mature, coherent for the first proposal of the theory. However, subsequent developments, refinements, and corrections were made in the following years, both by Einstein and by other physicists, to address certain ambiguities, limitation, or missing elements in the 1905 work. So it's admitting the 1905 paper is ambiguous, and that is the foundation of modern physics, which mostly is from Einstein in his 1905 special relativity paper. And so, like, yes, AI at least is admitting that is ambiguous. Modern physics is taken something ambiguous is a foundation. And so AI is going to say, here's a detailed breakdown of the corrections and refinements made to Einstein's 1905 special relativity paper. Number 1 is clarification and formalization of synchronization and simultaneity. And the issue in 1905 was Einstein introduced a procedure to define simultaneity using light signals, but it was somewhat informal and relied on the assumption that the one-way speed of light is the same in all directions, without explicitly stating the conventionality of that assumption. So Einstein did not state that assumption explicitly, and Einstein did not use the word one-way speed of light. So Einstein's making an assumption about light speed as it goes in one direction, and he's not saying he's making that assumption. So corrections and later refinement is the later work by Reinbach, Grundenbaum, and others. The philosophy of science emphasized that simultaneity is convention, not something empirically determined. And so the basis of Einstein's relativity, we're treating this as the basis of it. It's not based upon empirical evidence. It's not based upon experiments. It's just a convention. And that's not explicitly stated anywhere, as far as I can tell, when they teach Einstein's special relativity. They're not telling them, oh, this is just a convention. This is not based on experiment. It's just so next comes Minkowski's reformulation. He points out that Einstein's 1905 paper used purely algebraic methods and did not represent space and time geometrically. And so Minkowski and others like him were supposed to introduce the idea of making it a four-dimensional geometry. And they're supposed to reveal the deep geometric structure of relativity and set the stage for general relativity. And I think I mentioned earlier that general relativity is where you're having the space-time distorted or curved and so forth. And it points out Einstein initially resisted that, but this update went ahead, and because he's supposed to have changed his mind. So energy mass equivalence in 1905, Einstein introduced the idea that mass and energy are equivalent in a brief follow-up paper to his first paper on special relativity, but the argument was heuristic and not fully rigorous in the first presentation. So Einstein, basically what he's saying there, messed up his famous equation, E equals mc squared. He messed it up. His presentation of E equals mc E equals mc squared was a mess. So the corrections were supposed to come later by Einstein and others, and they provided more rigorous derivations of E equals mc squared using relativistic mechanics and field theory. So that's not talked about too much, that when Einstein first gave us E equals mc squared, that was a mess. And it was had to be later revised, sorted out. Next comes the. Am I getting the number right? Yeah, that's it. We're on number 4 now. The electrodynamics of moving bodies and the Lorentz force. Einstein's 1905 treatment, he focused on the transformation of Maxwell's equations, and that's Maxwell's electromagnetic theory. And he was under Lorentz transformations, but did not especially derive the Lorentz force law or fully address the transformation of charge and current density. So Einstein in 1905 wasn't going into sufficient detail about how all this connected to electromagnetic theory of Maxwell. And the refinements later came, later work clarified how the full current, capital J, four-dimensional current, so say when it's a full current, and the electromagnetic field tensor transform under Lorentz transformations. And this covariant formulation of electrodynamics became standard after 1908. So it's something else not in the original 1905 paper. And then it's in 1905 that Einstein derived the Lorentz transformations and showed Maxwell's equations are invariant. Under them, he did not use tensors or the language of Lorentz covariance. So tensors is more mathematics, as a form of mathematics. So later mathematics was introduced to deal with those things. And the language was, more language was introduced as such terms as Lorentz covariance. And the correction was done with the introduction of 4 vectors, that's 4-dimensional vectors for velocity, momentum, and so forth. And tensors made the theory manifestly Lorentz covariant. And this was mainly developed by Minkowski, Planck, and so forth after 1905. And number 6 is no explicit mention of invariant interval. Einstein in 1905 did not define the invariant space-time interval, which is now fundamental to understanding of causality and invariance in special relativity. And that correction was introduced by Minkowski. It became a central concept in the geometrical formulation of special relativity. And so in 1905, Einstein didn't properly deal with acceleration. There was supposed to be accelerated frames, and he didn't properly deal with it. I've talked to people about acceleration in Einstein's 1905 paper, and some people think he is dealing with acceleration to a certain extent, but really you should be making things much clearer about accelerated frames. Einstein didn't really deal with accelerated frames. He was just dealing with inertial frames. So he's got a theory in 1905, deals with inertial frames. What about the non-inertial frames, which are the accelerated frames? He's not talking about them. So it's leaving it ambiguous as to what's supposed to be going on with acceleration. And the correction was the extension to non-inertial frames and accelerated observers. And that was developed later by Einstein, but in general relativity. If you get onto general relativity, there's loads more things I could argue about as being wrong in that. But at this point, AI is treating that as an amendment to relativity. It's an update to what Einstein was saying in 1905, by then incorporating the acceleration. And in my view, that's just more of a mess. Number 8 is clock paradox. It's more normally known as twin paradox. And Einstein did not discuss it in 1905, and he didn't realise he was creating that paradox, it seems, in 1905. And he was making that mess by not distinguishing between coordinate time and proper time. Well, that was part of the mess he was adding to things. Twin paradox has extra mess to it than just those things. And the refinement was that these concepts were clarified in the 1910s and 1920s. And I think, no, twin paradox is still a mess, but AI, for this sake of this, is thinking, oh, things were tidied up after 1905 on the twin paradox. Number 9, his 1905 paper contained implicit transformations of velocities, but did not present the relativistic velocity addition law as we know it today. So he was adding velocities, but it had to be tidied up after 1905. And I still think it's a mess. Trying to make sense of this relativistic velocity addition, and that's still a mess, in my view. And so in 1905 paper, he wasn't really talking about thought experiments. Thought experiments such as the twin paradox is the most famous thought experiment. And he did not include those thought experiments to illustrate relativity. And those thought experiments, such as the twin paradox, were developed later by others. So here's a summary of the table of the key corrections and refinements according to AI. So the 1905 paper was informal simultaneity concept. It didn't have space-time geometry. It messed up E equals mc squared. Actually, it was the extra paper. There's 2 papers on relativity in 1905. The second paper on relativity where he messed up E equals mc squared. And he missed out dealing with the Lorentz force law. And he wasn't using the mathematics language that came later with tensors and 4-dimensional vectors. And he missed out talking about invariant intervals. And he missed out about, and he only dealt with inertial frames. He left it ambiguous about what would happen with non-inertial frames. And he missed out talking about proper time. And he missed out talking about the twin paradox. And it's saying here's no velocity addition law, but actually he did try to do a bit with that. So that was just tidied up a bit more after him. So AI tries to defend Einstein's relativity. But for me, it really highlights what a mess it is. Changes were made and never explicitly made clear, so leaving some not being aware of the changes. There's nothing written down in anywhere in any text stating this is the original theory of Einstein contrasted what the theory was updated to. I haven't found anything saying that Einstein's special relativity was updated in the relativity text. It's just treating Einstein's original paper on special relativity 1905 as its starting point, and is not saying anything about there being any changes to that being made. And so, in my view, it's just a mess because you can just make any changes you like, and nobody's keeping a record of those changes. I finished. That's it. That's the final end of this talk. That the conclusion is that Einstein's relativity is a mess, and I'm just very shocked by AI trying to use this method to defend Einstein's relativity. There's no records explicitly stating that Einstein's relativity was changed, but AI is treating that it was implicitly changed. So I go by records of what's in there in the literature, and AI is going to try to interpret what's being missed out, and it's coming up with this idea, well, the theory is implicitly changed. There's no explicit statement of it being changed. So in my view, that stealth, if it's implicitly changed, that's stealth and deception. If I want to go for an authoritative source for what Einstein's relativity is for special relativity, there isn't one. I can't go to that. All I got is to go back to what Einstein said in 1905. That's the foundation, and then somebody has made changes to that, but they're not going to tell you explicitly if those changes were agreed, because they weren't. They were just changes made, and people just went along with it. So that's my conclusions. I don't see any more hands coming up. I see James is eating. So not treating there's a hand coming up. So I just have a quick more look in the comments to see if there's anything else. Yeah, it's going on about ether a bit. Yeah, they're going on about GPS and things. So there we go. That's my conclusion. I think I can finish now. I can finish early. Nothing else coming up. Oh, there's private chat. Let's see. Yeah. So somebody saying here, notice Roger completely, in the private chat, completely avoids any attempt to judge scientific merit of special relativity. Well, how can you do that? All you got is supposed to be the experts talking about special relativity, and I haven't got access to an expert on special relativity. All I got is closest I've got is this artificial intelligence where I can start asking it questions about special relativity, which is not in the textbooks taught to physics students, and giving you information which is not even in the physics literature, it seems. It's because AI has come up with this idea that things have been implicitly changed when there's nothing in the scientific literature that's telling you that it has been explicitly changed. So it's just coming up with this myth. So common comment is about Roger wants to know what AI thinks. Well, yeah, it's difficult to know. AI doesn't think really, but it imitates it. So what word do you use instead of think? Imitation of thinking. So it says a comment about relativity is a mess, so why are you talking about it? Well, that is the foundation of modern physics, is to go by relativity, and I want to complain about that. I'm complaining about it because they're just teaching students, physics students, a mess, and then they're becoming physicists after passing the exams, and they're just believing things which is a mess. So yeah, something about Roger contradicts himself. AI list changes, but Roger says they're not written down. Well, they're written down by AI, but they're not written down in the relativity literature. So the private comments don't seem that interesting, really. So let's a quick look back at the main comments again. Still talking about GPS, it seems. Let's talk about the ether. So then they're going on to other diversions like the cosmological constant, and I haven't touched about that on this talk. Okay, so I think I've covered everything. So, and I've finished about half an hour early, so I can finish this end stream now. Then, thank you everybody for everybody's attended. Thank you, Dennis, for your comments and so forth. Okay. More. Okay. All right. That's the end. So that's the conclusion that Einstein's special relativity is a mess, and the mainstream have made change, supposedly made changes to it, and they haven't kept a record of what those changes are. And when AI comes along, it just wants to assume that there are implicit changes being made to it. And implicit one making, they made changes, but they're not telling you they made changes. So physics is a mess on this issue, and I think if you look at other sciences, if they're using the same sort of method of making the implicit changes to any particular theory that they're working from, then they're just making more of a mess on that as well. So that's my conclusion. Physics is a mess, and probably the rest of science. End of talk. Thank you very much. And a possibility I could go through the Lorentz transformations next time, because that's when I initially was talking to AI about, and how do you interpret the Lorentz transformations. And that's, of course, getting into a more specific area of the mess of that mathematics. So thank you very much. End of this talk. Cheers. End session. Cheers.